Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Haunted Victorian, where I recount true paranormal experiences that happened to me and my family in an old house in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. If this is your first time joining us, I'll make sure to link the previous two episodes in the description box below so you can go back and start at the beginning of the story. So far in this series, we've heard about an angry spirit, a woman in black, and ghostly footsteps on the staircase. And in this episode, I would like to tell you the tale of the phantom lights. So like I said in the last episode, there were certain places in this house that seemed to be hotspots for paranormal activity, and one of those spots was in our dining room. So just as a little bit of a refresher, when you come in through the front door of the house, you have a staircase that's going up to the left, and then a hallway going down to the right, and off to the right side there would be a door going into the dining room. And you could also get to the dining room through the living room through a large archway. So since this is a little bit of a shorter story, I am going to have a little bit of an extra at the end of this episode, so make sure you stick around to the end to hear some other spooky short stories as well. So just for a little bit of a layout of the dining room, we had a very large dining table right in the center of the room, and then over to one side in the corner there was a small bar that was kind of a little built-in bar that we would keep all of our wine and spirits on. It was very, very small, just a corner of the room really. And then in the back there was a large window, and on the main long wall of the other side facing towards the door, we had a very large china cabinet that my mom kept all of her fancy china that we would only see usually around the holidays. And we only usually used this room for special occasions, so Thanksgiving, which we always referred to as guinea pig night, because every year my mom would make something different and we would enjoy it in the dining room. We would also use it if there was some sort of fancy dinner for a birthday, and the only other time it was used really was when I was very small and I used to love building blanket forts in the dining room and playing with my mom's china out of the china cabinet. And as for the spirit activity in this room, we always had a problem with the light flicking on and off during the night. And this little light switch in this room was pretty unique because you had to use a little bit of force to turn it on, and when you did, you would hear almost a spring noise, a ping, when it would come on. So you could always tell when someone was turning on the light in that room. And as with a lot of the other sounds in this house, you could hear that light switch all throughout the house, no matter where you were. It was that loud. So frequently during the night, if my parents were upstairs and we had a very large area where you could look over the railing and you could see down into that area of the house, into the hallway, you could see the light going on and off during the night. And I don't think anybody was ever seen in that room turning on the light switch. It was just when they would hear the pinging noise and you could see the reflection of the light from the upstairs foyer where the bedrooms were. So an interesting fact about this house, it was built way back in 1902 by a very, very prominent family, and it was quite a bit larger than when my parents owned it. Unfortunately, there was a fire in the house before my parents moved in, and the entire back end of the house was completely destroyed, and instead of rebuilding it, they demolished that part of the house and made it into a smaller house. But the area of the house that was destroyed was most likely for that family's staff. So of course back then, a family that was that prominent would have a staff of servants that would cook their meals and do their cleaning and chores, so the family didn't have to. So we believe that that back part of the house was where the servants' quarters were, where the servants would sleep, and of course they would come down, likely through a different staircase, so they could start their morning chores. So we've often thought that maybe whoever was flicking on and off the lights during the night in the dining room could have been one of the servants that was coming through the back entrance into the dining area and making that area ready early in the morning before the family would have gotten up and come down to have their breakfast. So the light switch in the dining room clicking on and off and on and off at all hours in the night were experienced both by my father's family, who owned the house before my parents did, and then it continued after my family moved into that house as well. So an interesting experience happened to my older brother one night when he came home very late, and he went upstairs and he had the first door on the left hand side was his bedroom as soon as you went up over the stairs, and his room was directly over where that dining room area is. And he was getting ready for bed one night and he heard the very distinctive ping as someone was turning on the light in the dining room. And then of course his senses were heightened, and as he was standing there he heard a huge bang and all of the dishes smashing all over the floor. And the first thing that he thought was someone had tipped over the china cabinet. He said it sounded like someone had tipped the china cabinet over, and there was a large bang, and all of the dishes, he said, would have been smashed all over the floor with what he heard. So of course he thought maybe somebody had broken into the house, and he ran out, and when he got to where the door of the dining room was, he looked in and the china cabinet was totally fine. There was nothing broken, but the light, of course, was on in that room. So this story was not quite as spooky as some of the other ones, but still, if you were standing in that upstairs foyer and heard and saw the light coming on in the dining room, it would certainly get your attention. And still to this day, we believe that it was probably the household staff that was going into that room to clean out the fireplaces and set the table for the family that was living there and have everything ready for when they came down in the morning. So there you go, that is the tale of the phantom lights. So that's it for this part of this video, and in the second part of the video I wanted to tell you about some experiences that I've had personally when I decide to tell these stories to other people. So if you watched my last video that I did on the channel, my top 5 paranormal shows, you would know that halfway through recording that, my camera started having all kinds of technical issues, and it took me quite a while to get back to filming the rest of that video. So that's not the end of the story actually, so I wanted to come on and tell you guys what else happened that evening after I filmed that video. So while I was talking about spooky stories, my camera started to have all kinds of flashing symbols and lights, and it started beeping, and it came up that it was busy, which usually means that the memory card is full, but I know that there was lots and lots of space on this memory card. So I stopped recording. I had to take the camera completely apart, and it wasn't until I took out the battery and the memory card and set it aside for a little while and put it all back together that I could continue filming and the camera would work correctly. So after I was finished filming for the evening, I went upstairs because I have my filming area in my basement, and I was sitting on the couch editing, and all of a sudden one of my dogs, Dozer, he was lying over on his bed, and I wasn't sure if he was asleep, but he was lying down, and all of a sudden he perked up and his ears were right up, and before I knew it, the bottle of vegetable oil that we keep next to our stove over in the kitchen was pushed hard enough that it actually fell and rolled halfway across our stove. And that was quite freaky because I hadn't been in the kitchen in probably an hour, so there was nothing around that area that could have knocked it over. And even so, if it had fallen for some reason, there's no reason for it to roll halfway across our stove. So I got up and went over and picked up the bottle of oil, and just as I was coming back into the living room to sit down, the phone rang and there was nobody there. So that was the most recent experience that we've had in the house, And of course, I've done some saging and such since to make sure that we have a cleansed space. But that's not the only time that when I decide to tell ghost stories that someone tries to get my attention. So as I've said before, I am a spirit medium and an empath, and I do still have frequent experiences, but not as much as I did before I went on my mental health medication. I am bipolar, so I do take medications, and that kind of closes me off a little bit to a lot of the activity. There was another time when I believe I was in junior high, and I was on the phone talking to a friend, as girls do, and I was telling some of these spooky stories from my childhood home to this friend that I was on the phone with, and all of a sudden the line clicked off and clicked back on again, and we could hear voices in the phone line. We couldn't hear each other, but we could both hear the voices, and we were trying to get each other's attention, but we couldn't hear anything from the actual conversation that we were having. We both actually had to hang up the phone and unplug it from the wall and wait a couple of minutes and plug it back in before we could get those voices on the phone to stop and we could finally hear each other. And of course, when we recounted what happened, we were both having the same experience, but we couldn't hear each other on the phone. And for many years after that, this friend would tell the story to other people about when we were on the phone and the situation happened. But she quickly learned that, you know, if she's going to be friends with me, she's probably going to have some spooky things happening around when we're together, because that's just the life of a spirit medium. And then I think the craziest thing I had happen when I was telling these stories was when I was with my ex-husband and we were in our home and everyone was gone out for the night except for me, because he worked evenings and we had his brother living with us at the time and he worked late as well. So I was the only one home, and my older brother had recounted some of these spooky stories to a folklorist back in St. John's, Newfoundland, and the story was published in one of the newspapers. So my mom had sent me an email that had the story that he recounted so I could read it. And earlier in the day I was reading that story and of course, you know, shut the email down and everything. And at the time I was in university, and so I was working on other projects and stuff like that for the evening. Turned everything off, shut everything down. And so when I say that, I mean I turned the computer completely off and went downstairs and I was watching TV before bed. So after a little while, me and my dogs came upstairs. I had 2 Labrador retrievers at the time, and we were lying in bed. And I was just kind of starting to doze off to go to sleep. And all of a sudden I heard a beep, and then our printer in the computer room, which was just across the hall from my bedroom, started printing something. And when I went in, the computer was on and the printer was printing out the email with the story that my brother had written. And then as I was standing in the computer room, and this was something that we had happen quite frequently, my dogs actually ran out of my bedroom, tail tucked, down the stairs, and they wouldn't come back upstairs. So of course I followed them down over the stairs as well. I wasn't going to stay up there because I knew that in that house we did have a problem with poltergeist, and it was quite scary. So I was standing in, you know, the computer room holding on to the story, and I was totally baffled because there was absolutely no way that the computer was on by itself and the story was just sitting there waiting to be printed. I had been using the computer for the rest of the night and shut it down, so I don't have any explanation for that one whatsoever. And needless to say, I was up for quite a few hours before I would go back upstairs and finally get into bed once fatigue just kind of took over. But I think that was one of the many nights that I slept with the lights on. And when my ex-husband came home, he always knew when something was going on in the house. When he would come through the front door, all of the lights would be on in the house and he would know that something was going on. So that was probably the creepiest thing I've had happen, like I said, but it is not uncommon when I'm recounting these stories that I will have some sort of paranormal experience when I'm telling it. So that's why I like to sit in a sacred circle and make sure that I have protections. So haven't had anything creepy happen when I've been doing these stories, but having said that, now I wouldn't be surprised if I did start to have some. So there you go. That's a little bit of an inside look at my life as a spirit medium, as well as the tale of the phantom lights in my childhood home in St. John's, Newfoundland. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to leave me a comment below. And until next time, stay spooky, guys. Bye.